For 4 years, American Investigator has chased the trail of Chinese money in American politics, leading the pack in the search for the truth. Now at last, the whole story can be told. Trading with the Enemy takes you back to the beginning with never-before-seen evidence.
He said if they can help set up Bill Clinton to visit China, they will be a pleasure.
Trading with the Enemy asks, who's to blame?
He believed that the memo would lead directly to the vice president, the president, and the individual who's running Hillary Clinton's campaign in New York, Howard Ickes.
Senior defense officials speak on the record for the first time.
I was told directly that the pressure was coming from the office of Vice President Gore.
And former Clinton administration officials remain puzzled about America's policy toward China.
Chinese businessmen who gave money to the Democrats and the president's re-election campaign who had more meetings with him than you.
Well, the president's calendar speaks for itself.
Finally, the whole story in Trading with the Enemy.
It was the defining image of an era, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of 50 years of unremitting hostility known as the Cold War. With democracy taking hold across Eastern Europe, many looked forward to a prolonged period of peace and prosperity, an end to the relentless espionage, the proxy wars, the nuclear gamesmanship. Amid the celebration came a chilling reminder that peace and human rights are not inevitable. Under the cover of night in Beijing, in the shadow of the Forbidden City, Chinese soldiers massacred hundreds, perhaps thousands of pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square, reinforcing total Communist Party control of the world's most populous nation. 3 years later, in his campaign for the presidency, candidate Bill Clinton promised a tough line against those he then called the butchers of Beijing.
In China, the president continues to coddle aging rulers with undisguised contempt for democracy, for human rights, and for the need to control the spread of dangerous weapons technologies.
8 years later, the butchers remain in power in Beijing, perched atop a nuclear and conventional arsenal that defense analysts warn poses an immediate threat to American security and to the stability of Asia. Meanwhile, the campaign rhetoric of candidate Clinton has wilted under 8 years of headlines and allegations, gross security lapses in America's nuclear weapons labs, millions of dollars in illegal Chinese money routed into the coffers of the president and his party, big corporate contributors given the green light to provide sensitive technology to the Chinese military, career intelligence officers silenced after warning of the growing threat across the Pacific. American Investigator presents a sobering look at what may be the grimmest legacy of the Clinton presidency.
I don't believe you can find any evidence of the fact that I had changed government policy solely because of a contribution.
That is how President Clinton responded to charges that American satellite companies were permitted to share sensitive technology with Chinese rocket experts. Press investigations revealed that the company involved, Loral Aerospace, was a heavy contributor to the Democratic Party. In his defense, the president says he wasn't the first to allow U.S. satellites to be launched into orbit on Chinese rockets, but others say that there is more to the story.
One of those many things that Clinton says that may be technically true but are substantially false.
Michael Ledeen knows firsthand what went on in previous administrations. During the Reagan administration, he served as special advisor to the Secretary of State and a consultant to the National Security Council.
So that it is true that both Reagan and Bush, in desperation, asked for exceptions to the export control regulations to permit civilian things to be launched on Chinese rockets. But what Clinton did was to make it the hardcore of the policy.
The concern has haunted 3 administrations. Will commercial satellite launches in China help the Chinese enhance their military? And is it a risk that any president should take? Dr. Peter Leitner has been a senior technology export official in the last 3 administrations.
In today's world, both our military and civilian infrastructures are dependent upon communications and intelligence information that can't be obtained in any other way.
3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Dr. Leitner explains that Presidents Reagan and Bush were responding to an emergency situation.
The reason why the U.S. even entertained using China to launch U.S. satellites was because of almost our entire space launch capability was shut down following the Challenger disaster and also a series of spectacular Titan failures at Vandenberg. There was simply no other choice. There were cargoes that had to be lifted, and there was a severe shortage of lift capability. But it was never intended to become anything, to be done in any other way other than as an emergency stopgap measure.
Gary Milhollin is the director of the Wisconsin Project for Nuclear Arms Control. He typically has a more liberal perspective than Reagan advisor Michael Ledeen, but they do agree on one thing.
One of the distinctive things about the Clinton administration has been that unlike the Bush administration, it put people who were hostile to export controls in charge of the Pentagon. And so it's basically extracted whatever teeth the Pentagon had on export controls and left it just sort of flapping its gums together. And so we really don't have any agency in the government now that is committed to controlling the export of dangerous technology.
Senator, we are not selling them the kind of technology that allows them to target the United States. What this is are commercial satellites that are used for the purposes that I described, and we certainly would not be involved in any kind of sale that in any way jeopardized our national interest.
At issue, the transfer of U.S. weapons technology to Communist China, a military machine that is actively increasing its ability to project power across Asia. Historically, the U.S. has kept dangerous weapons technologies out of the hands of potential enemies by strictly controlling exports. Now, career technology experts at the Department of Defense tell congressional committees that those export controls have been ignored by the Clinton administration.
Just how serious is the problem?
Well, based upon our preliminary analysis, the situation is extremely serious from both a tactical and a strategic point of view.
Investigative reporter Kenneth Timmerman recalls the lesson in export controls he got while working on Capitol Hill.
I was working at that time on the Hill as an aide to Tom Lantos, who's a Democrat from California, working on precisely these issues of technology transfer to various regimes. Now, I thought at the time that there was a bipartisan consensus on national security and foreign affairs, but I learned my lesson pretty quick.
And so did you notice something irregular about the way the tech transfers were being handled?
Well, the most extraordinary thing that I found was the fact that the administration very early on, and I mean in April of 1993, found that China specifically was an extremely sensitive area. They tried to prevent us on the Hill from gaining access to export licensing records of U.S. high technology going to China. And that aroused my curiosity because President Clinton came in saying how human rights was going to be part of U.S. policy in the Clinton administration. Well, very early on, the administration dropped the emphasis on human rights. Very early on, the Clinton administration dropped any kind of scrutiny toward high technology sales to China and punished those who tried to bring that to light.
I had my computer broken into. I was assigned meaningless work. I was denied pay raises, bonuses. A whole series of actions, like punitive actions, were taken against me.
Were you ever told to just keep quiet and go along with the administration's policies?
I was told to find out what my boss wants and simply give it to him. And since my job is protecting national security and doing things on the basis of national security, I found this a totally reprehensible and immoral option.
Dr. Leitner's vocal opposition earned him scorn from administration officials and political appointees, but federal prosecutors who were listening eventually handed down indictments against one of America's largest defense contractors in October of 1999.
Were you surprised after waiting so long to see the McDonnell Douglas indictments handed down?
I was pleasantly shocked.
In 1994, McDonnell Douglas applied for an export license to sell machine tools to China. Dr. Leitner objected.
They were basically transferring to the Chinese the entire contents of a factory, of a defense factory, that made the MX nuclear missile, the C-17 strategic airlifter, parts for the F-18 and the F-15 fighters. And, of course, major parts for the B-1 bomber. This deal didn't make any sense from day one. For one thing, the end user didn't exist. For another thing, the location where they were going to ship the machines, that allegedly were going to ship the machines, was essentially an empty lot in Beijing. The machines themselves had far more capability than required for the parts that were being described. And we were very concerned, both myself and several of my colleagues, that not only did the business relationship being described not make any sense, but we were convinced, based on the evidence that we saw, that there was going to be a diversion where these machines were going to be put to use in China for the manufacture of advanced military products.
Dr. Leitner felt the case should not be approved. His superiors had other ideas.
First, they gave me an order to approve the case, despite my written analysis and conclusion that the case should be denied. Then they told me that if I don't approve the case, they're going to take it away from me and give it to somebody who would approve it, no questions asked. And it's very disturbing to me that those names of the people who gave me those orders, who went ahead and approved the case despite the objections, their names were conspicuously absent from the indictments handed down.
Just months after the license had been approved, several of the machine tools were traced to a cruise missile factory in mainland China, validating Dr. Leitner's original objection. But nearly 5 years passed before the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. issued indictments against McDonnell Douglas and China National Aerotechnology Import and Export Corporation. Frustrated sources close to the investigation told American Investigator that the indictments had been held up by political pressure from the Justice Department. Court findings accused the companies of making false and misleading statements in connection with exporting machinery to the People's Republic of China. Republican Congressman Jim Saxton recalls.
Well, the indictment shouldn't surprise any of us, because for those of us who watched the development, the painful development, the painfully slow development of the C-17 during the decade of the 80s and 90s, we saw the emergence finally of a weapon system that was unlike any other in the world in terms of deployments and delivery of people and equipment to far parts of the world where we need to get in a hurry.
Congressman Saxton chaired the Joint Economic Committee. Many view his hearings as the genesis of investigations that later discovered serious breaches of U.S. national security. Saxton took a personal interest in the McDonnell Douglas case.
It was astonishing to me to have had to contemplate that that technology was being offered for sale, apparently being ignored by our administration. That is, the sale being potentially ignored, at least, by the administration. And so to have these indictments come down is at least encouraging.
James Woolsey was President Clinton's director of the CIA when McDonnell Douglas sought administration approval for the machine tool transfer.
Some of these dual-use technologies present difficult problems. I think it was ridiculous for us to export, for example, or permit the export of the McDonnell Douglas machine tools that the Chinese have used for military purposes.
Are there government officials who are culpable in that?
Well, I don't know exactly why and how they did it. I don't know whether it was a fit of absent-mindedness and lack of attention, or whether someone made a really very bad decision consciously.
McDonnell Douglas denies any wrongdoing. Others say the indictments didn't go far enough.
Who in the government wanted this approved?
I was told directly that the pressure was coming from the office of Vice President Gore.
Congressman Dan Burton chairs the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee. He has heard many other career defense and intelligence employees complain of political pressure.
I believe the man's name was Fox. Yeah, Jonathan Fox appeared before our committee, and under oath he said that he did do that analysis, and that's his job to do analysis of military preparedness and what other countries are doing as far as nuclear proliferation and things like that. He was charged with the responsibility of doing a position paper or an analysis of Communist China and whether or not they were selling or sending or giving nuclear weaponry and technology to other countries.
Mr. Fox declined to be interviewed for this program, but American Investigator obtained a copy of his analysis. It clearly states that China, for a number of reasons, could not be certified as a non-proliferating nation.
He wrote his opinion and sent it through the chain of command up, I presume, to the White House. And about a week before President Zhang was coming over from Communist China to meet with the president, he received a call from one of his superiors saying, if you don't change that report, you're going to be fired.
Mr. Fox told associates that political pressure had forced him to remove the negative findings about China from his report.
Now, what does that mean? That means that the security of the United States and our allies has been further jeopardized by this administration or somebody in the administration who made him change his assessment.
But was this simply a difference of opinion? Former Clinton Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey, says no.
During your tenure as CIA director, were you aware that China was proliferating?
Oh, certainly. China's been engaged in proliferation of ballistic missile technology and some other nuclear technologies for some time.
What was President Clinton's reaction to that?
Well, I think the administration made some effort to try to persuade the Chinese to do less and to stop what it was doing, but I think it was limited essentially to diplomatic démarches. I don't think there was any very strong pressure put on.
What did you think when, in 1997, the president certified China as a nuclear non-proliferator?
I was somewhat surprised. I think China is not the worst proliferation problem in the world. I think the worst problem is probably Russia, followed rather closely by North Korea. But there is enough leakage from China of nuclear technology, of ballistic missile technology especially, and to some extent I think chemical technology, that it seems to me such a certification is very much on the side of being pro-PRC.
In '97, the administration certified China as a non-proliferator, as safe from the point of view of proliferation, simply to facilitate U.S. nuclear exports to China. And the reason those exports were facilitated was because of the political influence and the campaign influence of big U.S. exporting companies.
Are you suggesting that the current administration is putting politics ahead of national security?
I think this administration has been willing, more than any other in my experience, to put its own domestic political interests above the interests of national security.
Many government officials agree with Milhollin. Michael Maloof has spent the last 18 years combing through raw intelligence data. He has found evidence that potentially hostile powers have obtained advanced U.S. weapons technology, and he's issued numerous warnings within the executive branch that China has become dangerously effective in obtaining U.S. weapons technology. Mr. Maloof is speaking as a private citizen on the record for the very first time. What have you seen occur in the last 7 years during the Clinton administration regarding export control of dangerous weapons technology?
Well, during that period of time, over a long period of time, we have seen incrementally the liberalization of controls on technologies which we were warned back in the mid-'80s to be concerned about when it came to Chinese military buildup. Many of these technologies actually were targeted by the Chinese, military for more than a quarter century.
What do you mean when you say the Chinese targeted particular technologies?
Basically, the Chinese, for quite some time, have attempted to acquire an array of technologies which will assist in the modernization of their military, principally for power projection.
What effect will this have on the Chinese military, their ability to purchase U.S. weapons technology that has taken decades to develop and build?
Well, they'll be able to, if they can match our systems closely, it helps them in a number of areas. Number one, it helps them to come to operational capability much quicker than we did, thereby saving them maybe billions of dollars in research money, but also time. And in replicating our systems, it also helps them to figure out the countermeasures, which in effect will hurt our ability to come up with means to deter their ability to overcome our systems.
How has the President's export policy on dual-use technologies to the PRC, how has it affected national security issues for the United States?
Well, I think the Chinese probably learned a good deal about missile technology, particularly such things as MIRV buses and the like, from some of the corrections that the system permitted them to learn about after those satellite launches crashed several years ago. It's hard to assess the precise culpability for that, how much of it was the government, how much of it was the companies involved, and I understand it's an ongoing investigation. But the result was that they learned a good deal that was of assistance to them in developing sophisticated missiles under the guise of fixing their space launch capability for satellites.
Hot section engine technologies. We objected to this technology being shifted from the munitions list over to the commerce list.
We asked Mr. Maloof to identify the specific technologies China is trying to import from the United States.
They're looking for technologies, not only enabling technologies such as machine tools and high-performance computers, but also other exotic technologies such as composite materials, encryption.
It was President Clinton himself who assisted China in gaining access to U.S. encryption capabilities. Ignatius Ding is a Silicon Valley technology expert and human rights activist who monitors technology transfers from the United States that might be used to oppress Chinese citizens.
June 22nd, 1996, there is a little half-a-page memo from White House slipped right through Congress to declassify, allow to release cryptography technology to China. China alone.
Do you think that was a mistake or an orchestrated maneuver?
It is an orchestrated maneuver. It's sort of if you pay me right, you'll get it, piece by piece. It's a scan. It's a two-way thing. Chinese want to get it. The Clinton administration want to use that bait, I think.
For money?
Oh, yeah.
Under normal circumstances, the Department of Defense would have vetted such a waiver.
It's also my understanding that our department never reviewed those waivers or looked at those license applications.
And the Defense Department wasn't the only agency in the dark.
How about cryptographic technology?
Well, I have been bypassed on that. I was one of the supporters of the Clipper chip. I believed that export of cryptological material should have been restricted to circumstances in which the National Security Agency gave approval and the federal government or some neutral entity held the key, or one of the keys, for exported cryptographic material.
Off the record, several officials at the Department of Defense expressed deep concern at the President's approval of the cryptographic waiver. Alarm bells went off when American investigator questioned a cryptographic expert at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Here's what he said on the phone when we asked about the president's decision.
That is, I view as a serious detriment to national security, to our national security, because what we are doing is we are handing the Chinese the means to gain, not only to protect their own military activities from us, and we should not underestimate the Chinese ability to expand upon and exploit and rapidly exploit any type of technology which is given them.
The next day, we met with the defense expert for the videotaped interview, but to everyone's surprise, there would be no interview. Moments before we began, orders arrived from the Office of Strategic Defense forbidding him from speaking with American investigator. Why the gag order?
It seems that a significant contributor to the Democrats prior to the 1996 election stood to gain by the president's action. Can you say who benefited from a 1995 waiver of cryptographic technology?
I have an idea of who it might have been. I would have to get more research done, but it had to do with cellular phones with encryption devices attached to them.
Motorola lets you reach your destination with unlimited connections worldwide.
It appears that telecommunications and semiconductor giant Motorola, with the help of President Clinton, cut a deal that allowed the highly sensitive cryptographic technology to reach the state security branch of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. Chinese dissident Harry Wu knows firsthand how that technology can be used for oppression.
1995, I was caught at a border between Xinjiang, China province, remote area, Xinjiang and Kazakhstan. I have valid visa and legal American passport. But the Chinese government told me, do you know you're on the wanting list?
Mr. Wu's captor's communications equipment bore a familiar name.
Our two-way systems provide instantaneous communication because every moment matters. Motorola, what you never thought possible.
Motorola turned up in Mr. Timmerman's investigations as well.
I did an investigation for Reader's Digest recently and spoke to a missile technician who defected from a Chinese missile plant. He's now here in the United States, and we're protecting the identity of this person. He explained to me how the Chinese were incapable of producing a reliable solid fuel missile until 1993, when they got a big contract with Motorola here in the United States. This contract was approved by the Clinton administration.
Solid fuel missile has tremendous military implications. It's absolutely critical if you can have a road mobile missile that's going to have to be moved around often and fired on a moment's notice. You're not going to have time to sit out in the open where a potential enemy might hit you while you're waiting for 2 hours to fuel a missile up with liquid fuel. In addition, you're not going to want to have liquid fuel in the closed confines of a submarine. For submarine-launched ballistic missiles, there's no alternative other than solid-fueled missiles. And the Chinese did not have that technology before.
This administration has shown itself to be remarkably adept at making an end run around Congress. They do it through regulation, they do it quietly, and there is very little oversight of this because there's so many regulations written every day.
In light of what has come forward in sworn testimony in front of House and Senate investigations regarding campaign financing in 1996, has the administration taken any different approach in dealing with the People's Republic of China that might indicate that they are wary of the PRC?
What's happened since the campaign's finance scandal broke is that the United States has accelerated the shipment of high technology to the Chinese military. We haven't slowed things down. The government has accelerated this process. I think it's absolutely scandalous, and we're seeing whole new generations of Chinese weapons being developed with U.S. technology.
Have some of those waivers been turned down?
I don't know of any waiver that's been objected to my knowledge.
You don't recall any waivers for munitions or weapons technology ever being turned down by this administration?
For the Chinese or for anywhere?
For the Chinese?
For the Chinese, again, there were limited waivers, and every one of those waivers were allowed by the White House.
Today's so-called engagement policy is based on business interest. It's a typical appeasement policy. Appeasement never make peace. Appeasement never improve human rights in that country.
Where does the U.S. stand in terms of its moral commitment for controlling dangerous weapons technology, particularly when it comes to the PRC?
I think the motto of the Clinton administration has been, when in doubt, ship it out. We have missile technology going under the guise of help with satellites. We have supercomputers going to people who make big radars and then sell them to Iran. We have lots of other things. We have warhead technology going because of sloppy practices at our national laboratories. We have campaign contributions coming into the White House from Chinese military sources. All this looks very bad, and it comes from a certain attitude. And the attitude is, let's make a buck first and think about the consequences later.
Many experts have characterized the Chinese technology transfers as economic espionage, a way of getting technology that would normally be restricted by doing business with U.S. firms that have that technology. Nicholas Eftimiades is a U.S. government intelligence analyst. He spoke to American Investigator in this exclusive interview as a private citizen and author of the book Chinese Intelligence Operations.
In order to be able to deal more effectively with the West, if you will, to present companies or entities of the military as benign civilian companies, if you will, they put it under a purely civilian entity, when in fact it's really an entity of the PLA.
Government officials familiar with the McDonnell Douglas machine tool case see a disturbing pattern. In exchange for the sensitive machine tools, the Chinese government-owned company promised to purchase several hundred McDonnell Douglas aircraft. They didn't.
PRC is very good at bait and switch, and they are very good at holding out the glimmer of hope of vast markets in China and getting companies to make investments, and then getting hold of the company's technology and doing the manufacturing themselves instead of buying from the United States. They pull all of those tricks.
Is it possible that China Resources Holding Company is collecting or gathering intelligence for the PLA?
China Resources was used as a collection vehicle. Now again, remember, this is a very large-scale corporation, if you will, but it was also exploited, if you will, by Chinese military intelligence for collection purposes. And in particular, the China Resources in Hong Kong had I believe, a PLA officer in one of the vice presidential slots, and that position was used for access for scouting foreign technology and commercial intelligence useful to the PLA.
If the objective of Chinese scout companies is to get close to influential American high-tech companies, then China Resources has pulled off a major coup. China Resources became partners with the Indonesian-based Lippo Financial Group, a conglomerate controlled by the Riyadi family. Lippo's vice president was John Wong, later appointed to a key post at the U.S. Department of Commerce.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Waxman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to appear and address whatever issues may be of interest to you and the American people.
We found that when James Riyadi met with then Governor Clinton in California and got into the back seat of his limousine.
That was through the request of Mr. James Riyadi through me.
So you were requested by James Riyadi to set up a limousine ride where he could talk to Governor Clinton.
That's correct.
Privately.
Right.
James Riyadi said to the president, now President Clinton, that they were going to raise $1 million for his campaign from the Lippo group owned by the Riyadis in Indonesia. And as a matter of fact, about $700,000 of that commitment was kept. It came through Riyadi employees in the United States, and they were reimbursed by the Home Office in Indonesia.
Just months after the 1992 election, China Resources bailed Riyadi's Lippo group out of a losing investment in the Hong Kong Chinese bank. China Resources paid a 50% premium for Lippo stock, a multi-million-dollar infusion that saved Lippo from bankruptcy. The buyout occurred after the Riyadis held a series of meetings with President Clinton at the White House. Soon after those meetings, President Clinton abandoned his anti-China campaign stance and renewed China's most favored nation trading status. According to reports, President Clinton, the Lippo Group, and China Resources have known one another since 1985, when China Resources paid for then-Governor Clinton to travel to Asia on a trip organized by Lippo.
Was not to look into or investigate anything to do with the export of missile or satellite technologies to China.
Who told you that?
My superiors told me that, and it was the first time I'd ever been told that for all the years that I've been working at the Department of Defense. And of course that set up all kinds of bells and whistles, and I immediately, of course, began to look at it. Because we had to look at export licenses. We still had a responsibility, and if it was going into the Chinese military, then we had an obligation under our as civil servants to alert the system and try to do something about it.
Mr. Maloof compiled the data from his investigation on this chart. It explains the connection between Chinese money donated to the president's re-election campaign and the technology that went out to China.
What this basically shows is who the Chinese entities were under the Central Military Commission, both on the operational side and in the defense industry side, that not only was targeting the technologies from the United States, but also who the cutouts were for the passing of money to not only purchase the technology, but to buy influence.
According to Maloof, front companies were used to mask the involvement of the People's Liberation Army.
It shows that a number of entities actually were set up using shares from previously known entities that were tied directly into the PLA.
The Chinese government may have had partners along the long money trail.
Now, this would suggest that the Chinese military was involved with the triad, the Chinese triad, organized crime factions?
Not only that, but the Chinese triad, I should say the PLA used the Chinese triad to help create the front companies and also to launder the money.
Creating front companies to launder money is a way of concealing the source of illegal donations. But if true, why did some of the company officials see the need to meet with Clinton face to face?
We also see the president at meetings where he was speaking, where there was almost no one who spoke anything but Chinese, and most of the people in the room were Chinese nationals, not Chinese Americans. And they were fundraisers.
Mr. Maloof quickly identified a Chinese intelligence agent.
Lieutenant Colonel Liu Xiaoying, who later set up a similar company in Torrance, California with Johnny Chung. And it was those two who then met President Clinton at a presidential fundraiser back in July of 1996.
Mr. Maloof suspects the operation had to do with satellites and encryption.
In doing my own analysis, I determined that based upon the satellite exports that were going over time, that basically the Chinese satellites themselves for telecommunications were no longer working, and that the Chinese were actually reliant upon U.S. satellites for their encrypted communications for the military.
Even a notorious Chinese arms dealer whose company dealt ballistic missiles to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and was caught by U.S. Customs attempting to smuggle 2,000 AK-47s into San Francisco had access to the president.
Wang Jun, who was a visitor, as I said earlier, on this chart to the White House back in '95, is the chairman of Polytechnologies. His organization actually comes under the General Staff Department. Yet, it was his organization that owns about a third of a company called Asia Satellite Telecommunications Company, which was to be the ultimate recipient of U.S. satellites.
Wang Jun's associate, Charlie Tree, contributed more than $1 million to the Democrats and to the president's personal legal defense fund, with no visible means of his own to make such contributions. This Tree-Clinton connection goes way back. This never-before-broadcast amateur videotape shows Charlie Tree hosting a delegation of Arkansas state officials on a trip to the People's Republic of China. The year is 1992. Former state auditor Julia Hughes-Jones was part of the delegation.
This was 1992. We were the guest of Chun Twin, is the way it's pronounced in the Mandarin dialect.
Mrs. Jones provided American Investigator with this tape and this letter from Governor Clinton welcoming the same officials from China to Arkansas a month earlier. Most revealing is Charlie Tree's discussion with these Chinese officials.
His policy toward China could be influenced, certainly by people sitting at this table, a lot more than George Bush. George Bush already knows what he wants to do, and there will be
he was the ambassador of China, so he knows Bill Clinton. He said if they can help set up Bill Clinton with China, there will be a pleasure.
It helped Charlie Tree get established as a middleman. Charlie has always been a hustler, is the best way to put it. He's a go-getter. And of course he knew who had power and who didn't.
Others have been less charitable, describing Tree as a bagman for those in China wishing to funnel money to President Clinton. Charlie Tree has now plea bargained his way through a series of federal indictments involving illegal money transfers.
An America that will not coddle tyrants from Baghdad to Beijing.
In the time since Bill Clinton was elected president, many new Chinese companies have shown up in the U.S. Jeffrey Fiedler is a senior official of the AFL-CIO who says that Americans should not be rolling out the red carpet.
Some time ago, you may know that we discovered 24 Chinese companies at one time or another. Chinese military companies, People's Liberation Army companies, and People's Armed Police companies operating in the United States as well.
Among them, J&J Ammo, located in the sparsely populated Adelanto, California.
It's a combination alternately owned by the Public Security Bureau, which is the police force of China, and what is known as the People's Armed Police. They were going to, in that location, manufacture ammunition.
Not just any ammunition, AK-47 assault rifle ammunition. With that information in hand, Mr. Fiedler says he warned the administration.
We asked the president to throw them out, revoke their visas, and toss them. Didn't happen.
The president's a Democrat. Labor unions have a very big influence, but your concerns weren't addressed?
No.
With evidence of China's military influence from California all the way to the White House, one might suspect that the U.S. had been the victim of a massive espionage operation run out of Beijing. In fact, that is what a congressional report, the now famous Cox Report, found.
In June, the committee you served on regarding Chinese espionage released a report suggesting that the PRC had an enormous amount of spies in place in the United States gathering information. For what purposes?
Basically to steal or to take American technology.
To the best of my knowledge, no one has said anything to me about any espionage which occurred by the Chinese against the labs during my presidency.
Republican Congressman Curt Weldon sat on the House Select Committee on Chinese Espionage. The committee was formed to investigate allegations that China had successfully penetrated U.S. nuclear labs and garnered nuclear secrets.
The unfortunate thing for us is they didn't have to steal it. We had an administration who responded to their overtures and basically gave them the technology. What I saw during 7 months of closed briefings for the CIA, the FBI, and the DIA was more often than not our government simply allowing for technology to be transferred to China, either because of campaign finance dollars that were greasing the skids of key people and players or agencies, or because of CEOs that were well tapped into the control mechanisms in our government to allow exports to be fostered.
When you say that some of this technology was transferred,
on the basis of campaign finance coming in. Are you suggesting a quid pro quo?
Absolutely. I think that's why Janet Reno did not, in fact, want to empower an independent counsel.
Congressman Weldon is a Republican. Louis Freeh, on the other hand, is President Clinton's FBI director.
Does that include the president and the vice president?
Yes, sir.
Also calling for an independent counsel was Charles LaBella. Attorney General Janet Reno selected him to lead the Department of Justice task force investigating campaign finance abuses in the 1996 election.
When you have a Bill Clinton appointee, Louis Freeh, a man of impeccable credentials and integrity, get a recommendation from Charles LaBella, a 97-page document that laid out the basis of the reason why the FBI said to Janet Reno she should appoint an independent counsel, you understand that there is evidence there that needs to be aired, that the American people need to see.
The LaBella memo, as it is referred to, led investigators to conclude that the president and the vice president were involved in illegal campaign fundraising activities.
America needs to see the LaBella memo. And if Bill Clinton has nothing to hide, then he ought to be the one to bring that memo forward and say, here, look for yourself. Until he does that, I'm convinced that it's a quid pro quo.
The Attorney General would say that to open this free LaBella memo would compromise the Justice Department's investigation.
Hogwash. If the Attorney General doesn't want to release the memo to the entire public, we have a select committee in the Congress, an intelligence committee, but to say that no one in America should have the right to see that memo except for Janet Reno and the two people who wrote that memo is, to me, unbelievable, anti-democratic, un-American, and grounds to consistently press this administration on what they're hiding.
U.S. House Republican Chief Counsel for Impeachment, David Shippers, was allowed to see an abbreviated version of the memo.
Well, obviously, those who saw the redacted version are not allowed to talk about it. But I did ask David Shippers to characterize the intent or the tone of the memo. And he has told me that, that he believed that the memo would lead directly to the vice president, the president, and the individual who's running Hillary Clinton's campaign in New York, Howard Ickes.
Leads directly.
Could lead directly to them.
Republicans in Congress are calling into question the Justice Department's investigation.
As much as possible.
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Who gave you that check? Did Charlie Tree give it to you?
I thought
Excuse me just 1 minute.
What do you think of Wong's plea arrangement with the Department of Justice?
Well, I think they just gave him a slap on the wrist. We know he was a conduit, along with Charlie Tree and others, in bringing probably millions of dollars into the president's campaign in both 92 and 96. These were violations of the law. Money was coming in from communist China, and Wong and Tree were deeply involved in that.
Both John Wong and Charlie Tree pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations, but neither received any jail time.
I think he got a $10,000 fine levied against him. Charlie Tree had almost no community service time, and they weren't even going to give him a financial fine until the judge said, hey, this isn't right, and the judge, on his own, gave Charlie Tree a $5,000 fine. So Janet Reno, it appears, and I think it's probably very accurate to say, has been defending the president, and one of the ways she defended him was by giving Wong and Tree just a slap on the wrist so that they won't go into too many details. The FBI asked for agents to go in and take out of Charlie Tree's office documents that were being shredded 3 times, and Janet Reno said there was not enough probable cause, so she stopped that.
Congressman Weldon worries that the Loral investigation has also been compromised.
I think there was evidence that there were illegal activities that took place. I think even the corporate lawyers acknowledged they did things they should not have done in giving the Chinese access to processes and information they should not have given them. Of course, I do think it was a coincidence that during that same time period, Bernie Schwartz gave $1 million to the Democratic National Committee. That was purely a coincidence that he was the largest donor in the history of the Democratic Party during one fiscal year. I'm sure that had no bearing on any of the things that occurred during that time period.
In 1998, the president signed another waiver for Loral and Hughes, which had merged in the interim period, for more satellite launches, a maneuver that even the Justice Department considered to compromise their investigation. What's your opinion of that?
It was very untimely. It was inappropriate. There was evidence that went right to the White House itself for that decision.
The Cox Committee report stated that China had stolen nuclear warhead designs from the Los Alamos, New Mexico nuclear laboratory. The FBI had been investigating a possible suspect for at least as far back as 1997, but Attorney General Reno denied the FBI's request to wiretap Wen-Ho Lee's phone conversations. Clear evidence, argues Burton, of obstruction of justice.
So when you ask me the question about the possible espionage involvement by Wong or Mr. Wen-Ho Lee or anybody else, all I can say is that every time the FBI has tried to do their job where the administration might get a black eye, Janet Reno has stopped them. And so I don't fault the FBI or Louis Freeh. I fault Janet Reno and the Justice Department.
According to a 1997 Washington Post report, the FBI notified candidates that China was attempting to influence the 1992 election. Before coming to the U.S. in 1996, Randolph Kwan was a banker for Chinese government-owned businesses. Mr. Kwan said that after Bill Clinton's election, his boss was less concerned about violating U.S. laws.
I would put a date on it, is about October 1994. This is an idea he was kicking around, so he mentioned this, and this is the third incident in which he mentioned, they have cover or special channel to hide decision-making circles, and that if anything goes wrong, it can be fixed.
Another significant figure in the campaign finance investigation was Johnny Chung. Mr. Chung told prosecutors the origin of $300,000 in Chinese money.
This gentleman identified himself as a Mr. Xi. He said, "We like your president. We like to see him re-elect. I'll give you $300,000 US dollars, and you can give it to your president and the Democrat Party. I will wire you $300,000. You can wire to him. I need a receipt in order to report to the organization."
The mysterious Mr. Xi turned out to be the head of Chinese military intelligence.
It leaves nothing to the imagination, I guess, to suggest that that this kind of activity not only was orchestrated by the Chinese military, but was sanctioned at the highest levels of the Chinese government as well as the Chinese military.
Despite Mr. Chung's help, the Justice Department recommended he get a harsher sentence than Mr. Wong or Mr. Tree.
The DNC tried to portray themselves as a victim, victimized by Johnny Chung. I feel they took my money with a smile, but they laughed at me when I turned my back. And even they tried to send a letter to the judge, portray themselves as a victim, and ask the judge to draw the book at my face. Thank God. This judge is a really tough judge with a good heart, and he looked deep, and he ordered the letter out of the court. At March 9, 1998, after I plead guilty, immediately I was approached by a gentleman named Robert Liu, represent himself like a Chinese messenger. And we had the first meeting at the Hilton Hotel at the city of Torrance, California. And I want everybody to understand that every word I said, I was scripted by the Department of Justice and the FBI. The message he sent it to me is delay, delay, delay. The President of the United States is going to visit China. It's more important than anything. Delay, take the FBI and the Department of Justice around and around. If you keep quiet, you can retire in style, which is a lot of money. And even suggest I will get a presidential pardon if I wanted to keep my mouth shut. And then, one thing they don't know is that this is all under video and audio tape.
So you have the head of the Chinese military intelligence saying he wanted to see our president reelected, and gave $300,000 through the head of the aerospace industry, Liu Chao-ying. And that money was to go to get President Clinton reelected. At the same time that this was occurring, espionage was occurring at Los Alamos, and nothing was being done about it.
What do you think the president knew of all this? Did he have a cursory knowledge?
I think it stretches credulity to think that the president was not aware of the campaign contributions that were coming in and where they were coming in from.
Did you notice that the administration did not give intelligence issues a high priority?
Well, I went to the National Security Council meetings, of course, and once in a while the president would have me in for a morning briefing, but that was very rare. Mainly he read the president's daily briefings. And other than that, I had 2 private meetings with him in 2 years.
There were Asian businessmen, Chinese businessmen, who gave money to the Democrats and the president's re-election campaign, who had more meetings with him than you.
Well, the president's calendar speaks for itself.
In light of what we know from congressional committees about campaign financing in the 1996 election, a lot of money coming in from dubious sources, including the People's Liberation Army, could this have had an effect on the president and his decisions?
I don't know, and I don't want to make that sort of allegation, but I do think that there is a lot here that needs to be looked at very carefully. There is a lot of smoke here, and whether there's a fire is yet to be seen. But the combination of the political contributions and the PRC government's policies and their use of their intelligence services, all of these things together are matters that ought to be, I think, very thoroughly investigated by federal prosecutors.
Is war with China inevitable? According to China's Minister of Defense, it is. Chi Ho-chin addressed a conference of the Military Command College in December of 1999. He told the group, quote, "Seen from the changes in the world situation and the United States hegemonic strategy, war is inevitable," close quote. Chi went on to say that the Chinese armed forces must control the initiative in this war.
What does that mean?
It means that the Chinese are going to be able to choose the time and place of a future conflict and strike first in a well-planned surgical strike. After 7 years of Chinese access to some of our most advanced strategic technology, they'll have a decided advantage.
They understand information warfare. They understand American vulnerabilities.
Few people understand China as well as James Lilly. During the Reagan administration, he served as the U.S. ambassador to China.
Our reliance on stealth bombers, our reliance on satellites, our reliance on aircraft carriers. They are focused in their military and dealing with these vulnerabilities. It's all in their writings. There's no great mystery about it.
Experts say China has learned quite a bit about the U.S. vulnerabilities through the acquisition of Western high technology. What does China intend to do with this high technology? The answer can be found in China's so-called 16-character policy, codified in 1997.
The 16-character policy is the PRC's formal agenda for using their civil sector to support their military modernization by acquiring the necessary technology. The literal translation is combine the military and the civil, combine peace and war, give priority to the military products, and let the civil support the military.
How does that relate to what Chi Ho-chin said about controlling the initiative of war?
It means that the high-tech items we ship to the PRC will come back to haunt us. We already see the technology transferred to China showing up in the arsenal currently being arrayed against Taiwan.
The PRC's One China policy dictates that Taiwan is simply a renegade province that will be reintegrated under communist rule. But do they have designs on other territories as well?
Basically, they want to become the dominant power in Asia. Not in the world. They want to be recognized worldwide, but they want to be the dominant power in Asia, militarily, economically, and politically. I think this is quite clear. Their biggest rivals in this are the United States and Japan.
Have you seen evidence that China has territorial ambitions beyond Taiwan?
Very strong evidence, both in their words and their deeds. The Chinese are currently using military force to assert their dominion over the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, and are now establishing a military foothold on Coco Island, owned by Burma, in the Indian Ocean.
The defensive tactic involves getting a buffer zone around their most valuable area on the coast, where 85% of their production is, along the coast.
Defense analysts consider this island chain strategy as central to the Chinese military doctrine.
This strategy lays out the Chinese plans for the domination and control of a vast part of the Western Pacific. The first island chain refers to their inner defense perimeter. This is disputed territory that the Chinese are currently using military force to back up their claims that it is historic Chinese territory. The second island chain encompasses a huge segment of the Pacific Ocean where they intend to dominate politically, economically, and militarily.
This is not the first time in recent history that such an ambitious attempt has been mounted to control the Western Pacific.
China's island chain strategy is remarkably similar to the Japanese Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. In one of the greatest ironies of the post-World War II period, Japan, which once claimed Manchuria, they called it Manchukuo, and China to be part of its vital inner sphere, will soon find itself within China's inner sphere.
The Chinese have expanded far beyond the island chain strategy to establish a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. Since the mid-1990s, the Hong Kong-based Hutchison Whampoa has operated both ends of the Panama Canal. When U.S. troops were withdrawn at the end of 1999, many analysts were concerned that a company so closely tied to Beijing was running canal operations.
Their presence in the Panama Canal zone is very unsettling because of the opportunity it provides the Chinese to disrupt the movement of U.S. warships and supply vessels during a period of crisis, which could, in effect, spell the difference between success and failure in sustaining U.S. military forces in a Pacific conflict. However, Chinese presence in the Panama Canal is only the tip of the iceberg. For instance, the Chinese presence in Cuba is growing rapidly, but even more important is their penetration of the United States itself.
The AFL-CIO's concern over Chinese military-run companies operating in the United States led them to release this report naming the companies and their locations. Remember J&J Ammo, the Chinese military-owned bullet manufacturer in Adelanto, California? It turns out they have company. Defense analyst Peter Leitner uncovered what he considers dangerous penetration by the Chinese.
Most people don't realize the importance of Southern California to national security. People generally think of Disneyland, surfing, Hollywood, but Chinese intelligence sees through the bright lights and glitz and into the heart of our high-tech military assets.
In June of 1997, Dr. Leitner testified to the Joint Economic Committee about the Chinese presence in the strategic location of Adelanto.
First, the China Ocean Shipping Company, also known as COSCO, attempted to take over the Long Beach Naval Shipyard. At the same time, other agents of the Chinese government purchased and began to develop a parcel of land in the Mojave Desert town of Adelanto. Ostensibly, they were building a wholesale mall to showcase Chinese products.
Jeffrey Fiedler questions the reasons for locating a wholesale mall at such a remote location.
It always struck me as odd, since the Victorville area is not where I would choose in Southern California to go, since its population density is not anywhere near what it is in LA or Long Beach or San Diego. Rather, I don't think it was much of a coincidence that it was located near a U.S. Air Force base.
The Chinese selection of Adelanto as a site where they planned on erecting 20 50,000 square foot buildings has had little to do with commercial issues. The selection of this location was an act of absolute genius from the standpoint of military intelligence. It lies in the heart of the U.S.'s most advanced military aerospace manufacturing and testing complex. Also nearby is a huge marine open-air storage facility in Barstow. Any serious movement of military equipment from Boston bound to our Pacific forces would be easily spotted from Adelanto.
They have made a very conscious decision that we are their major strategic problem in future, because we are the one nation that gets in the way of their manifest destiny. Therefore, it's logical, it's in all their writings, it's quite clear. You've got to develop systems to deal with the American military strategic strength. It's all there. And they single it out religiously, very carefully. They commit their money, they set up the organization, they get the right people, and they do the research and develop on the systems that deal with these vulnerabilities. It's all in books, it's all there, quite obvious.
China, in its zeal to achieve Asiatic supremacy, has shopped the world for modern arms, buying up the best that short-sighted nations have to offer. From China's alliance with Russia, it's getting state-of-the-art warships, submarines, high-speed cruise missiles, and fighter planes. As U.S. defense downsizes and auctions off its manufacturing capabilities, China and its agents are first in line to bid. According to the experts, the United States stands chiefly in the way of the Chinese objectives of dominating the Pacific. Yet China struck gold in U.S. technology by mining it with shovels full of dollars poured into one administration's political coffers. The full accounting lies ahead.